Well, that was easy. I hope you're keeping up. But let's just make it slightly more complicated and also make it very relevant to you in terms of some of the terms you're going to see on your CV. We can't just leave it as client server. But in summary, what we've said so far here is essentially that users back in the old days used to work on dumb terminals linked to mainframes. In networking, this is known as centralized architecture. And that was great. We said that it had a load of benefits to that. Along came the personal computer, and of course, this meant power to the people. It was like having a mini mainframe on your own desk, and this became known as decentralized architecture, as opposed to the centralized architecture of the earlier chapter. So I'm just summarizing at this stage. But these things were great because it was standalone, and it was like having a mini mainframe on your own desk. Now, the problem was, of course, when the PC came along, it was kind of like the dawn of personal madness, because what happened was that users started to play, waste time, introduce their own applications, and of course, as a result of this, there was a huge era where suddenly the era of viruses started to appear. And of course, what this means is that the networks were brought down, but it also means that with the advent of the PC, with the CD-ROMs and the floppy drives of the earlier models, suddenly there was a huge risk of theft of data. So for the first time in the era of IT, you realize that actually people could take away data with you as well, and that's what the PC allowed people to do. So this was a bit of a nightmare for the IT department. We also introduced the idea of client-server architecture and the idea that the server was any machine at the back that served the clients. The client, so I'm just summarizing here from what we've said previously, the client was the machine at the user end, and of course it was often a PC. I'm introducing a new term to you now. So, when networking people refer to clients, they also categorize them as being of two types. And you might see this on CVs. Now, a PC is referred to as a thick client. So a PC, with all its dangers, was because it was inherently a thick client. And the reason why we called it a thick client, the other term, by the way, is fat client, is that it's got two things. And any device in a network that has these two things here is often referred to as a thick client. And these two things are processing and storage. So any device that has its own processing and its own storage is called, by networking people, a thick or a fat client. So of course a PC is the ultimate thick client. But inherently, PCs, thick clients, had their own problems. And what we're saying here is that a PC can be thought of as a thick client, but it has got plenty of processing power. It has got a large usable hard drive, but you can load up your own application software on this as well. And it is connected to the server, but it's not dependent on the server. So there are a lot of things that come with the thick client. However, the world hated thick because it introduced viruses, it introduced data theft, and so the IT department started to ask this question: why can't we go back to the days of the good old dumb terminals? And that started to happen in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So in network, there was another chapter that was about to happen. This era of hating PCs. And trust me, the IT department hates you with your PCs. If you have your own storage and your own CD-ROMs or USBs that work, well, that is anathema to the IT department's idea of control. And so we had to come out with a solution that was going to be like a PC, but actually have all the benefits of the good old dumb terminals. We needed to go back to the dumb terminals. But we knew that actually no one would ever go back to the days of dumb terminals, because now they'd already had a taste of the PC. And so there was a new era in networking, and that occurred around the late 90s, early 2000s, where suddenly we had to have a hybrid situation so that the company could gain back control. And this is where we introduce the idea of thin clients. Now, you're going to see this on job specs, especially if you're in the infrastructure market. What is a thin client? Well, if a thick client is a PC with plenty of storage and plenty of processing, a thin client has minimal processing and no storage. It is only working if it's connected to the server. And so it's totally controlled by the server. Does this remind you of anything? Thin clients are the modern day equivalent of dumb terminals. The one thing we realized in the 21st century is that actually they did get it right back in the day when they had dumb terminals connected to servers. Once we let the users loose with their own machines, they introduced too many problems. So from the year 2000 onwards, banks, large organizations around the world started to rip out their machines, their PCs, and replace them. Even recruitment companies. You could go back into your recruitment company, and on Monday morning, you would have a device. It would look kind of cooler than the other machine that you had, which was a PC. It had a screen, of course, beautiful keyboard, lovely mouse, but the big box had disappeared. So that massive box with a hard drive was no longer there. It was replaced by something called a thin client. And it would possibly have something like Citrix written on the side. If you are involved in infrastructure or networking recruitment, you will often get jobs saying, we require network engineers who are expert at migrating from a thick to a thin environment. And this is what they mean by that. We're going thin means that we are coming over to the new version of the old dumb terminals. How do you know your candidate in networking is expert at thin clients? Well, they will have these terms here on their CVs. They will have things like VDI, or virtual desktop infrastructure, which is another term for a thin environment. They start to use the term zero client. All of these terms here, the idea that they're using VMware is a very good indication that that client is looking to go thin. The Dell has its own product on the market called Wise, so you'll see that on CVs as well. HP has their own product, but the one that is most sought after around the world for companies looking to migrate to a thin architecture is Citrix. Citrix is the company, XenApp is the actual product. So XEN, XenApp, Xen Server, Xen Desktop, all of these are terms relating to the Citrix environment that turns your architecture from a thick, nasty, insecure architecture to a nice, tight, thin architecture. Thin clients with Citrix, can actually have your server applications on cloud as well. So essentially your server doesn't need to be on site. The applications can be hosted on cloud, and all your employees will have is beautiful screens with keyboards and a mouse, and everything else is handled off-site. Extremely good, extremely thin, extremely secure. The only downside to thin, and I don't know if you've spotted this, is that it has an Achilles heel. The one Achilles heel is that when your server goes down in a thin architecture, you are stuffed. You are in the dark ages. And so essentially what this means is that a lot of organizations haven't gone thin. Some organizations, maybe if you're looking at your own, if you've got a PC there, then maybe the organization has realized that there is one benefit to staying with PCs, thick clients, and that is that when the server goes down, at least you can carry on with some work, because PCs can work without being connected to the server. You can write a letter, you can draw some slides, you can get on with something because there's some local processing. But with thin, when the server goes down, the entire architecture goes down. That's it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that. That was a walk through the trajectory of networking from chapter 1, when you just had mainframes linked to these dusty old dumb terminals. Then we were introduced to PCs, and then they were networked up with servers. Eventually we started to call them clients and the back-end servers. And then eventually we started to use the term thick client for PCs because they had plenty of processing power and storage. We realized that there were downsides to those, and of course then we came over to thin. So a lot of your requirements will be about coming over to a thin architecture, migrating over to a thin architecture. But as long as you understand both of these different types of architecture, when you're speaking to your networking people, that's all you need for infrastructure at this level. More with regards cloud, virtualization, and the technical stuff further on down the road. For now, that's great.